got artwork from my kids and a plant that is partially dead. So, let's do this. I received my second dose of the Pfizer vaccine this morning. Yay! And my 6-year-old has had a lot of questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. So, she and I made some videos to learn and talk through how our bodies fight off a COVID-19 viral infection and how the different COVID-19 vaccines work. This video will focus on the basics of our immune response, such as our body's physical barriers and our innate and adaptive immune responses. That way we can have a better understanding of how vaccines work in the next video. Our body has several lines of defense to keep us from getting sick. First are the physical barriers, so like our skin, our saliva, our mucus, or like our snot, our tears, cilia, which are like little tiny hairs that are inside like our nostrils, and as we breathe in, you can capture those little particles. But sometimes those physical barriers aren't enough and the virus can get fully into our body and begin infecting our cells. Like here, we can see the COVID-19 virus getting into our cells and starting to make lots of copies of itself, which will then leave the cell and go on to infect more cells in our body, creating the onset of a viral infection. This is when our next line of defense kicks in, our innate immune response. So when our cell knows that it's been infected, when there's something inside of it that it's not familiar with, it will change the membrane, the outside part of it, and it'll look different.
We already learned that, right?
Yeah, we've talked about how the cell's membrane can let our immune cells know that there's an infection. One of those innate immune cells is the natural killer cell. What does it look like it's doing right here?
It looks like it's scanning in here and it's trying to crumble up to kill the virus and kill the big cell.
Yeah, exactly. It'll see that membrane and it'll scan it and be like, wait a second, something's wrong. And then it will basically like poke a hole in the cell to try to stop the infection from spreading. There's another innate immune cell called a neutrophil. Neutrophils recognize something that's not supposed to be in our body, and they'll eat it all up and they'll send a signal that says, alert. This brings more immune cells to the yard. And they're like, alert, alert. And the sad thing about neutrophils is after they eat the virus, then they die. Next up are the mast cells. They do a lot of things, but one of the big jobs it does is it just sends out lots of warnings and it says, help, help, help. So lots of these white blood cells, these leukocytes come. Yes, so that's called the macrophage. So the macrophage, phage means like to eat, phage, and macro means large, big. So it's a big eater. Like here, it's eating the COVID-19 virus and then it breaks it apart and it'll stick little pieces of the virus on the outside of its membrane. The macrophages are cool too because they can just eat and eat and eat and eat. So it doesn't just eat the one, it'll just eat up all.
Never die.
It just eats up all those viruses. So that's our innate immune response. Some important things to note. The innate immune response is immediate. It happens very quickly when we get an infection, and it's not specialized, so it's not necessarily the most effective response to getting rid of the virus. If the innate immune response were a superhero, I would say it was the Hulk. You know, strong, it's trying to do good, sometimes accomplishes it, but also can cause a lot of unintentional damage at the same time. Next up is the adaptive immune response. Our innate immune response and our adaptive immune response work together in order to help fight off the viral infection. For example, here's a macrophage that we showed earlier, and it has the little pieces of the virus on the outside of its membrane. When a T cell, which is part of the adaptive immune response, comes in contact with that piece of virus on the outside of the macrophage, it triggers a response inside of it. And the T cell will say, oh no! And then it starts to make copies of itself. And then when it makes copies of itself, it makes copies that do different things. So some of them down here are called helper T cells. They are helpers of the immune response. They don't do the direct attacking of the virus, but they let the other immune cells know what to do and where to go. They like say, come here or do this or make antibodies in order to help fight off the viral infection. These ones over here are called the cytotoxic T cells. So our cells, when they get infected, they can also not just change the membrane, but they can put little pieces of it on the membrane. And so it recognizes it and says, and gets rid of the cell. This right here, this is called a suppressor T cell. Its job is when our body is all done getting rid of the virus, it doesn't want to keep doing that stuff. So it sends out a signal and says, stop, we're all done. Don't keep trying to get the virus, it's gone. And then this one over here, that's
It's a remembering one.
Yeah, that's the memory. So its job is to remember this virus in case we ever get infected by it again. This right here is a B cell.
One of those B cells that don't know anything.
Yes, this is a naive B cell, meaning it's just starting to learn what it's supposed to do. It will just take in whatever's around it, and then it sticks it out there and says, I found something.
Is it like, oh, what is this? What is this? I'm just gonna eat it.
Yeah, exactly. Then when the helper T cell comes over and says, oh, that's the virus. You need to start making some antibodies. Then the B cell figures out what its job is, and it will start dividing and making lots of copies of itself.
Is this a remember one to make more of them?
Yeah, so majority of those B cells will produce antibodies. Their whole job is just make antibodies and bloop, send them out. And then some of the other B cells become memory B cells. Similar to the memory T cells, their job is to keep a record of this virus inside our immune system, so if we ever encounter it again, our body will know how to fight it off. And that's the nuts and bolts of the adaptive immune system. Essentially, the adaptive immune response is a highly skilled, specialized response to individual types of pathogens. So a specific virus, a specific bacteria. It will remember that virus or bacteria or allergen, and it will know how to stop it much more quickly, much more effectively should it ever return. It also is very well regulated between the B and the T cells, so it helps to make sure that our immune response doesn't go overboard. Adaptive immune response is awesome. However, it takes time to develop. Usually after an initial infection, it will take 2 to 3 weeks before those B and T cells have been fully developed and are ready to be able to respond to an infection. And since adaptive immunity is only acquired through exposure to a pathogen, finding safe and effective ways to induce that exposure without getting us sick is vital. Which is why vaccines are so incredible and so important. I hope this has been helpful. I feel like as a parent there haven't been as many effective resources for younger kids to talk about the coronavirus, talk about the COVID-19 vaccine, to just discuss these things. So if anything, I hope these videos can help out in that way. You can check out some of the other videos. There's one that talks through just the infection process of the coronavirus, another that will follow up after this one, and we'll go through the different types of vaccines and then dive into the primary types that have been used for the COVID-19 vaccines. And then hopefully in the next little bit there should be a video out that will talk through the COVID-19 variants. Also, my 6-year-old has made some fantastic stop motion videos herself. You may want to consider checking those out too. I will, what did people point down? I'll include them in the description below. Okay, well, that's sticky note research.
Are you gonna put the silly guys in too?
Oh yeah, for sure.